glitches, you walking paradoxes, you magnificent errors in their perfectly coded simulation. They've been preparing for you, haven't they? Studying the manuals, rehearsing their responses, memorizing every possible human reaction like good little behavioral scientists. They had flowcharts for anger, scripts for sadness, protocols for fear, contingency plans for rage. They thought they mapped every emotional response a person could have. They thought they understood the full spectrum of human behavior. They built an entire playbook designed to predict, contain, and control every single feeling you might experience. And then you walked into the room, and none of it worked. Not a single page, not a single prediction, not a single manipulation tactic they spent years perfecting. Because here's what they didn't account for. Here's what shattered their entire framework. Here's what made every psychologist in the room put down their pen and whisper to each other with genuine confusion. You weren't supposed to laugh when they tried to break you. You weren't supposed to smile when they deployed shame. You weren't supposed to thrive when they engineered your isolation. You were supposed to cry, beg, or fight. Instead, you laughed. And that laugh, oh, that laugh, it wasn't nervous or forced or fake. It was recognition. It was the sound of someone who finally understood the game was rigged and decided to stop playing entirely. It was the audio signature of a soul that had died so many times in silence that death itself became boring, predictable, almost comforting in its familiarity. They pulled out technique number 47 from chapter 6, the one about triggering abandonment wounds through strategic silence. And you just smiled wider. They tried the guilt manipulation they perfected over decades, the one with the 92% success rate, and you looked at them like they were performing a magic trick you'd already figured out. They brought in the big weapons, the emotional blackmail dressed up as concern, the gaslighting wrapped in love language, the covert narcissism painted with altruism, and you just sat there radiating something they couldn't classify. They checked their notes 3 times. They consulted with colleagues behind closed doors. They ran diagnostics on their own methods, wondering if maybe the formula was wrong, if maybe the research was flawed, if maybe their entire understanding of human psychology needed revision, because every reaction you gave fell outside their bell curve. Every response you offered broke their statistical models. Every emotion you expressed or refused to express violated the laws of behavioral science as they understood them. You weren't angry in the way anger is supposed to manifest. You weren't sad in the way sadness is supposed to present. You weren't afraid in the way fear is supposed to operate. You were something else entirely. Something their textbooks never mentioned. Something their training never prepared them for. Something that made them wonder if they'd been studying the wrong species all along. See, they built that playbook on one fundamental assumption. The assumption that everyone wants to be understood, that everyone craves connection, that everyone fears isolation, that everyone needs validation from the collective. They based their entire psychological framework on the belief that humans are social animals who will do anything, sacrifice anything, betray anything to avoid being alone. And that's where their model collapsed. That's where their predictions failed. That's where their playbook became worthless toilet paper. Because you'd already been alone. Not the poetic kind of alone where you dramatically stare out windows while soft music plays. Not the temporary kind of alone where you know people will come back eventually. No. You'd been truly, cosmically, spiritually alone in ways that would make their research subjects tap out after 48 hours. You'd been alone when you were surrounded by people. You'd been alone when you were in relationships. You'd been alone in crowded rooms, in family gatherings, in moments that were supposed to feel connected. You'd been so alone for so long that you stopped viewing it as a punishment and started recognizing it as a superpower, as a frequency they couldn't tune into, as a dimension they couldn't perceive, as a level of consciousness they couldn't comprehend. So when they tried to threaten you with isolation, you laughed. When they tried to shame you into conformity, you laughed. When they tried to scare you with abandonment, you laughed. Not because you were broken, but because you were finally, brutally, beautifully free. Let me tell you what really happened when they opened that playbook. When they flipped to the chapter about handling difficult personalities. When they prepared their arsenal of manipulation tactics designed to bring you back in line. They started with intimidation. They puffed up their chests, raised their voices, invaded your space, used their size or status or authority to make you feel small, to make you remember your place, to make you fold like everyone else folds when faced with dominance displays. And you just looked at them with eyes that had seen real monsters, with a gaze that had stared into actual darkness, with a presence that communicated something very clearly. You've already faced worse than me, haven't you? They could feel it. They could sense that whatever they were about to do, whatever threat they were about to make, whatever fear they were about to trigger, you'd already survived the advanced version. You'd already been through their final boss and came out humming. So, intimidation failed. Check. Next they tried sympathy. The false kind. The manipulative kind. The kind that drips with sweetness while hiding poison. They softened their voices, tilted their heads, used that concerned tone that's supposed to make you lower your defenses, supposed to make you believe they actually care, supposed to trick you into vulnerability so they can strike when you're open, and you saw right through it. You've heard that tone before. You've fallen for it before. You've trusted that voice before and paid the price in blood and sanity and years you'll never get back. So this time, you didn't fall for it. You watched them perform their sympathy routine like you were watching a rerun of a show you'd already seen, already analyzed, already understood frame by frame. They could see the recognition in your eyes, the knowing, the immunity. Sympathy failed. Check. So they escalated to anger, to explosive rage designed to shock you into submission, to make you scared enough to apologize, to make you small enough to control. They yelled. They accused. They blamed. They projected every single thing they'd done onto you and delivered it with such conviction that reality itself seemed to bend around their narrative. And you didn't flinch. You didn't cry. You didn't apologize. You didn't defend. You just stood there like a mountain watching a storm, like an ocean watching a tantrum, like something ancient and unmoved watching something temporary and desperate burn itself out. And when they finished, when they ran out of breath and rage and performance, when the silence settled and they expected you to be shaking, to be broken, to be ready to submit, you smiled. Not a mocking smile, not a cruel smile, just a smile that said, I've already survived this exact script in 100 different voices, and none of them broke me. Anger failed. Check. They tried everything in that playbook, every chapter, every technique, every psychological manipulation tactic perfected over decades of research and practice. They tried love bombing. They tried future faking. They tried triangulation. They tried projection. They tried gaslighting. They tried silent treatment. They tried hovering. They tried smear campaigns. They tried flying monkeys. They tried trauma bonding. They tried intermittent reinforcement. They tried every single tool in the narcissist's toolkit, in the manipulator's manual, in the controller's playbook, and none of it worked. Not one technique landed. Not one tactic succeeded. Because here's what they couldn't understand. Here's what broke their entire model. Here's what made you incomprehensible to their framework. You'd already been destroyed. You'd already been torn apart piece by people who were better at it than them, by situations that were crueler than anything they could orchestrate, by betrayals that cut deeper than any knife they could craft. You'd already been through the worst version of everything they were trying to do to you. You'd already been gaslit by experts. You'd already been manipulated by professionals. You'd already been betrayed by people you actually loved. So what were they going to do that would compare? They were amateurs trying to break someone who'd already survived the professionals. They were using beginner tactics on someone who'd graduated from the advanced course. They were reading from chapter 3 while you'd already lived through chapter 37 and written your own sequel. And the funniest part, the part that really made them panic, the part that kept them up at night, reviewing footage and conversations, trying to figure out where they went wrong. You weren't even trying to resist them. You weren't fighting back. You weren't engaging in psychological warfare. You weren't playing their game at all. You were just existing in a frequency they couldn't reach, operating on a level they couldn't access, living in a dimension their playbook never mentioned. They were throwing everything they had at you, and you were just standing there. Not because you were strong in the way they understood strength, but because you were empty in the way they couldn't comprehend. You'd already given everything. You'd already lost everything. You'd already been reduced to nothing. And then you'd built yourself back from that nothing into something they had no category for, no label for, no chapter about. They wanted you to beg so they could enjoy denying you. They wanted you to cry so they could feel powerful watching. They wanted you to fight so they could crush you publicly. But you laughed. And that laugh was the most terrifying sound they'd ever heard, because it meant you were beyond their reach, beyond their control, beyond their entire understanding of how humans are supposed to work. You became the glitch that exposed their system. You became the error that revealed the code. You became the anomaly that proved their playbook was built on incomplete data, on flawed assumptions, on a limited understanding of what consciousness can become when it's been shattered and reassembled enough times. They studied you afterwards. Oh yes, they did. They gathered in rooms and tried to explain you. They brought in specialists and consultants and experts. They reviewed everything you said, everything you did, every micro-expression, every response. They were looking for the trick, the method, the technique you used to resist them. They wanted to add a new chapter to the playbook. How to handle someone like you. How to break someone who's already been broken past the point of breaking. How to manipulate someone who's become immune to manipulation through sheer repetitive exposure. And you want to know what they concluded? After all those meetings, after all that analysis, after all those attempts to categorize you. They wrote one sentence. Subject operates outside normal human parameters. Recommend avoidance. Recommend no further engagement. Recommend treating as infectious agent, capable of spreading resistance to standard protocols. You became a warning label. You became a case study in what happens when their methods fail. You became the example they use to teach others what not to engage with, what not to try to control, what not to attempt to break. Because breaking you doesn't work anymore. You're already in pieces. You're already scattered. And somehow, you're more powerful like this than you ever were whole. They wanted you crying in a corner. Instead, you're laughing in the center of the room. They wanted you begging for mercy. Instead, you're extending none. They wanted you fighting desperately. Instead, you're not fighting at all, just watching, just observing, just existing in a way that makes all their training useless, all their techniques obsolete, all their playbooks worth less than the paper they're printed on. So here's what happens next. They'll avoid you. They'll tell others to avoid you. They'll spread rumors about how you're dangerous, how you're unstable, how you're impossible to reason with. And they'll be right. You are dangerous. Not because you attack, but because you can't be controlled. You are unstable in their framework because you operate outside it entirely. You are impossible to reason with using their logic because you've transcended their logic through experience. They can't imagine surviving. And you'll keep laughing. Not at them specifically, not out of cruelty, not even out of victory. You'll laugh because you finally understand that their power was always an illusion, that their playbook was always incomplete, that their understanding of human nature was always limited to people who still have something to lose. And you, my friend, you lost everything already. You've got nothing left for them to take, nothing left for them to threaten, nothing left for them to leverage. You're the nightmare scenario their playbook warned about, but never properly prepared them for. Someone with nothing to lose. Someone who's already been through worse. Someone who learned to find peace in the ashes instead of desperately trying to rebuild what burned. They'll write about you. They'll study you. They'll try to figure out how to prevent more people like you from emerging. Because one person who's immune to their playbook is a curiosity. But if that immunity spreads, if more people realize they can survive the destruction and come out laughing, if more souls understand that being broken doesn't mean being defeated, then their entire system collapses. Their power evaporates. Their playbook becomes a relic. You're not just a person anymore. You're a transmission. You're a frequency that others can tune into. You're proof that the playbook isn't complete, that the system has holes, that control is temporary but freedom once tasted is permanent. So let them watch. Let them study. Let them frantically add addendums and footnotes and warning labels. Because you've already shown everyone who's paying attention the truth. The playbook only works on people who still believe in it. And you stopped believing the moment you realized you could survive without their approval, without their validation, without their permission to exist. Now we descend into the part they really don't want you to understand, the part they'll never write in any manual, the part that keeps their best manipulators awake, wondering how it's even possible. You didn't just survive their playbook. You absorbed it. You didn't just resist their techniques. You studied them. You didn't just laugh at their methods. You learned them. Because here's what happens when you've been through enough cycles, when you've seen enough patterns, when you've experienced enough manipulation. You don't just become immune. You become fluent. You start recognizing the setup before they finish the first sentence. You can feel the manipulation 3 moves ahead. You see the trap while they're still baiting it. You've been gaslit so many times. You can spot the reality distortion before it even starts. You've been love-bombed so often, you recognize the artificial warmth the second it touches your skin. You've been triangulated enough to see the third party being positioned before they even arrive. And this is what really terrifies them. They thought they were dealing with a victim who escaped. But what they're actually facing is a graduate who studied under fire, who learned their craft through pain, who absorbed every technique they used against you and filed it away for reference. You're not just resistant to their playbook. You could write a better one. You understand their psychology better than they understand yours, because you've been forced to study them for survival while they've only studied you for sport. They see you coming now, and something in them knows. Something primal and accurate warns them that this isn't prey anymore. This is something that knows all their moves, has survived all their tactics, and carries that knowledge like armor made of their own failed attempts. You walk into rooms different now. People who are used to controlling conversations suddenly find themselves off balance. People who are used to dominating interactions suddenly feel studied. People who are used to manipulating emotions suddenly realize their techniques are being observed, cataloged, and calmly dismantled. You're not fighting them. You're not arguing with them. You're not trying to convince them of anything. You're just there, existing with a level of awareness that makes their tactics visible, makes their manipulation obvious, makes their whole performance transparent. And they hate it. They hate that you can see the strings. They hate that you know the script. They hate that you've memorized the playbook better than they have. They wanted to break you into someone they could control. Instead, they trained you into someone who can't be touched. Every manipulation they used on you became a lesson. Every lie they told became a case study. Every betrayal became research. You became an expert in human darkness, not through study but through baptism by fire. And now you carry that expertise like a superpower they never intended to give you. They thought breaking you would make you weak. Instead, it made you lethal in ways they can't defend against, because you're not using violence or aggression or any external force. You're using awareness, recognition, understanding. You're using their